Welcome to Genesis chapter 21. Today is not only the chapter reading, but also the Bible study. The Lord visited Sarah as he had said, and the Lord did for Sarah as he had spoken. Notice in the last chapter, or chapters, Abraham and Sarah both were promised a child. And so Sarah conceived and bore Abraham a son in his old age and her old age, at the set time of which God had spoken to him. And Abraham called the name of his son who was born to him, whom Sarah bore to him, Isaac. Then Abraham circumcised his son Isaac when he was 8 days old, just as God had commanded him. Now take note that they now have a son named Ishmael, and they also have one named Isaac. Ishmael came from them taking their own hands into God's promise, whereas God fulfilled his promise the way that he said, even still. Then Abraham Now Abraham was 100 years old when his son Isaac was born to him. And Sarah said, God has made me laugh, and all who hear will laugh with me. She also said, Who would have said to Abraham that Sarah would nurse children? For I have borne him a son in his old age. So the child grew and was weaned, and Abraham made a great feast on the same day that Isaac was weaned. And Sarah saw the son of Hagar, the Egyptian, whom she had borne to Abraham, scoffing. Therefore she said to Abraham, Cast out this bondwoman and her son, for the son of this bondwoman shall not be heir with my son, namely, with Isaac. And the matter was very displeasing in Abraham's sight because of his son. But God said to Abraham, Do not let it be displeasing in your sight because of the lad or because of your bondwoman. Whatever Sarah has said to you, listen to her voice, for in Isaac your seed shall be called. Yet I will also make a nation of the son of the bondwoman, because he is your seed. So you see God fulfilling his promise to Abraham right away. So Abraham rose early in the morning and took bread and a skin of water, and putting it on her shoulder, he gave it and the boy to Hagar, and sent her away. Then she departed and wandered in the wilderness of Beersheba. And the water in the skin was used up, and she placed the boy under one of the shrubs. Then she went and sat down across from him at a distance of about a bowshot. For she said to herself, Let me not see the death of the boy. So she sat opposite him, and lifted her voice and wept. And God heard the voice of the lad. Then the angel of God called to Hagar out of heaven, and said to her, What ails you, Hagar? Fear not, for God has heard the voice of the lad where he is. Arise, lift up the lad, and hold him with your hand, for I will make him a great nation. Then God opened her eyes, and she saw a well of water. And she went and filled the skin with water, and gave the lad a drink. So God was with the lad, and he grew and dwelt in the wilderness, and became an archer. He dwelt in the wilderness of Paran, and his mother took a wife for him from the land of Egypt. And it came to pass at that time that Abimelech and, I don't know how to say that, Fichol? I have no idea. It's a Phichol. The commander of his army spoke to Abraham, saying, God is with you in all that you do. Now therefore swear to me by God that you will not deal falsely with me, with my offspring, or with my posterity, but that according to the kindness which I have done to you, you will do to me and to the land in which you have dwelt. And Abraham said, I will swear. Then Abraham rebuked Abimelech because of a well of water which Abimelech's servants had seized. And Abimelech said, I do not know who has done this thing. You did not tell me, nor had I heard of it until today. So Abraham took sheep and oxen and gave them to Abimelech, and the two of them made a covenant. This is really interesting. So at first Abimelech gave Abraham these things. Now Abraham is giving Abimelech these things. And Abraham set 7 ewe lambs, baby lambs, of the flock by themselves. Then Abimelech asked Abraham, What is the meaning of these 7 ewe lambs, which you have set by themselves? And he said, You will take these 7 ewe lambs from my hand, that they may be my witness that I have dug this well. Therefore he called that place Beersheba, because the two of them swore an oath there. Thus they made a covenant at Beersheba. So Abimelech rose with Phichol something, the commander of his army, and they returned to the land of the Philistines. Then Abraham planted a tamarisk tree in Beersheba, and there called on the name of the Lord, the everlasting God. And Abraham stayed in the land of the Philistines many days. Okay, so we are going to recap. So we're going to start back on Genesis 15. So if you missed our last two Bible studies, we had one on the 7th chapter, and we had one on the 14th chapter of Genesis. And so now this one's on the 21st. I'll go back over starting at 15. Okay, so in chapter 15, we experience the Abrahamic covenant between Abraham and God. Okay, so God formally makes a covenant with Abraham, promising him a vast number of descendants, land, and that his offspring will be a blessing to all nations. So this is a pretty crucial section because it introduces the concept of a covenant sealed by a sacrifice. And that's going to get way more important as we start getting through the first 5 books of the Bible. We're going to hear a lot about sacrifice. And then, even later in the Bible, we're going to hear about the ultimate sacrifice being Jesus, right? And that's going to be, God makes a covenant with all of us when we hear about Jesus. Now, in Genesis chapter 16, we experience the birth of Ishmael, Abram and Sarai's impatience. So that I was struggling with the names in that video too, but their impatience leads them to taking matters into their own hands. So God had given them a promise, right, that they were going to have a son. But instead, because they were quote unquote too old, but Sarah wanted a son, Sarai gives Hagar to Abraham, her maidservant, and their son Ishmael is born. Now, this is an important lesson on the consequences of not waiting for God's timing. Okay, and so we will see Sarah get rebuked later on. The covenant of circumcision and new names in Genesis chapter 17, God reaffirms his covenant, changes Abram's name to Abraham, the father of a multitude is what Abraham means, okay? And Sarai's name to Sarah, which means princess. Circumcision is introduced as the sign of this eternal covenant. Okay, so that is the covenant of circumcision and new names. Just a recap, circumcision was to be done 8 days after, so you'll see Jews still do that. I think in the U.S. they do it pretty much the first day. But because we have Jesus, that covenant is no longer essential. It's a past Jewish law. The destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah, so that's in Genesis 18 through 19. God reveals his plan to Abraham, who intercedes for the cities. And this shows Abraham's relationship with God is personal and conversational. So Lot and his family are rescued, but the story serves as a sober reminder of God's judgment against sin. And so if you guys haven't gone through that, you're going to remember that, well, I guess you wouldn't remember, but Lot's wife turned to a pillar of salt when she looked back, which was against the Lord's command. He wanted them to go in faith and to follow his commands on the way out. But Lot and his 2 daughters are rescued. And then in Genesis 21, which is the chapter we just read, we experience the birth of Isaac, and the promised son is finally born when Abraham is 100 years old. So Isaac's name actually means laughter, and you can almost catch that by what happens in the verses where it's like Sarah named his son that because she laughed, right? Like that's almost assumed. But this is a reflection of Sarah's joyful and once doubtful laughter. Right? She had been rebuked for her doubtful laughter. Now, this is a powerful demonstration of God keeping his promise, even when it seemed impossible. So, to some, this might seem like a miracle, right? I mean, it really is. You don't see many 60, 70-year-old women having babies these days. Well, she was 100. um, and so, anyways, that is our Bible study for the day. So now we have a few discussion questions. Okay, so how I'm going to do this is I'm going to ask you a question, and then if you guys are talking about this with your families or whatever, then you can just pause the video, and then I'll give you a couple potential answers that you can mull over. So, question number one: what does the story of Ishmael's birth teach us about waiting on God's promises? So, go ahead and pause. What does the story of Ishmael's birth teach us about waiting on God's promises? Now, the answer to that is that it shows us taking matters into our own hands can complicate things. God promised Abraham and Sarah a son, but they got impatient. Their solution was using Hagar to have a child, which created a major conflict that still has lasting effects, right? There was a little bit of strife between that when Isaac was born, okay? So it teaches us the importance of patience and trusting God's timing. God's plan is always perfect, even if it feels slow. We can trust that he will fulfill his promises in his way and in his time. So if he gives us a timeline, he is going to be faithful to that. Now, we're on to question number 2. The names of Abraham and Sarai were changed Abram and Sarai were changed to Abraham and Sarah. What does a name change mean in the Bible, and why was it significant for them? Okay, so go ahead and pause. Now, we're talking about what does a name change mean in the Bible, and why was it significant for them? Here's the answer to that. A name change in the Bible often signifies a new identity or a new purpose given by God. Well, we recognize that when we accept Jesus Christ, we're given a new life, right? Now, it is a sign of a new beginning when these people get their names changed, okay? So for Abraham, exalted father is what the original name means. His name is changed to Abraham, which is father of a multitude, to reflect the promise that he would be the father of a great nation. For Sarai, my princess, was the original meaning for that. Her name is changed to Sarah, which means princess, to show that her role was no longer limited to her immediate family, but was part of God's wider plan for a new people. Now we're on to question number 3. How did Abraham's conversation with God about Sodom and Gomorrah show their relationship? And how can we talk to God like that? So, go ahead and pause. Recap. How did Abraham's conversation with God about Sodom and Gomorrah show their relationship? How can we talk to God like that? Now, here's the answer to this. This conversation, Genesis 18, shows a close, personal, and respectful relationship with God. Abraham spoke to God as a friend, confidently but humbly. He wasn't afraid to ask questions or even intercede on behalf of others, right? To step in between them and God and talk to God for them. We can talk to God like that by praying boldly and honestly. We can ask him questions, share our concerns, and intercede for our friends and family. Now, this doesn't mean demanding things, right? But it shows that we trust him enough to bring our honest thoughts and requests to him. Now, I pointed out something when we were reading these chapters, that when Abraham was interceding, he kind of begged with God, right? A little bit. He was like, I hope you're not getting mad with me, but the way that we see Jesus pray later on in the Bible is that he says, Lord, if there is any way that you can take this cup from me, please let it be so. But if not, let your will be done, right? And I think that's an even better example of praying boldly and honestly, but going, God, I want to be aligned with your will. Okay, now here is Question number 4. Isaac's name means laughter. Why was this the perfect name for him? I think if you read, you're going to enjoy this question. It's kind of obvious, right? But go ahead and pause. So here's the answers. Okay. So Isaac's name means laughter. Why was this the perfect name for him? It's a reminder of Sarah's initial faithless laughter when she heard she would have a child in her old age, which was Genesis chapter 18, verse 12. Now it's also a reminder of the laughter of joy and fulfillment when Isaac was finally born in Genesis 21, verse 6. And then it's a powerful reminder that God's promises are often so big and miraculous that they seem laughable, but He always comes through. Okay, so we're seeing things constantly that it's like these are crazy things that God is promising, but He always comes through. Okay, so now we're on to question number 5. Can you share a time in your life when you had to wait for God to come through on a promise? And how did you feel when He did? Go ahead and pause. Can you share a time in your life when you had to wait for God to come through on a promise, and how did you feel when He did? Now, this is a very personal question, so the answers will vary. But that's for you guys to really come up with, right? There's no right or wrong answer here. It's a very personal question. If you guys are with a group, encourage each other to share honestly. If you feel comfortable, you can start by sharing your own personal story to model vulnerability and openness, validate each other's feelings, and if people in your group waited a long time and felt discouraged, acknowledge that. Okay, if they felt overjoyed when God came through, celebrate with them. The goal is to show each other that your struggles and joys in your faith journey are normal and that you guys are not alone. So, hope you guys had fun today. A little bit longer video. So, please like and subscribe if you haven't already. And I will see you guys again each day this week. So, we'll be going through more about Abraham, and maybe, I don't know if we'll quite introduce Moses yet, but we're getting there. So thank you guys for being a part of this. Bye.